Well, hello and welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started for our webinar Wednesday today on demystifying data analysis. Thank you to all who have joined us, and we appreciate you taking the time out to listen in on this webinar. So I am Courtney Kohler. I'm a Senior Associate with the National Community Action Partnership. Today's webinar is hosted by the Organizational Standards Center of Excellence at the Community Action Partnership. And so I'm going to be running a lot of the background, behind the scenes functionality of the webinar. And we have some various presenters with us today that I'll introduce in just a moment that are going to be presenting the content. And basically what we're going to talk about today is some simple analysis techniques and stories from local community action agencies to be able to help agencies get started with a plan for undertaking the evaluation phase of the ROMA cycle. We're going to be looking at elements of a data-centric agency, along with ideas about what is needed to have good data. So we're going to talk about data collection, aggregation, analysis policies and procedures, and examples of putting analysis of data to work during decision-making to demonstrate how to use data for program improvement. We are recording this webinar as well, and so a recording link will be available within the next couple of days. It'll be posted to our website at communityactionpartnership.com. We will also share a PDF of the slides as well. You can always email me if you would like those a little bit sooner, but otherwise we will be posting those to our website as well. And just a couple housekeeping items as well. Everyone is muted, so just to cut down on background noise since we have a larger group today. But we do encourage you to engage through the chat box, and please ask questions as you have them or make comments. So you can see a little circle with a chat bubble, and you can send your chat questions to all panelists, and then we'll help field those. We'll take a couple breaks throughout the webinar just to field those questions and share out the answers. And with that, I'll go ahead and introduce our presenters for today. We have 4 presenters with us, 2 of which are from the Association of Nationally Certified Roma Trainers, Barbara Mooney and Carrie Gibson. And then we also have David from CASE in West Virginia and Kate out of Community Action Opportunities in North Carolina. So happy to have you all with us today to present this information. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Barbara Mooney. She's going to be telling us a little bit about the agenda for this webinar.
Thanks, Courtney, and I'm excited to be able to talk to y'all today about data collection and data analysis. And we're going to get some good stories from the field, thinking about using data from the community needs assessment process, and then also using program data for improvement and innovation. We'll talk a little bit about being data-centric, about policies and procedures and staff training, and then as Courtney said, if you have questions throughout the presentation, type them in the chat box and we will try to address them. This part of what we're going to do today is a very brief presentation of part of a series that we've created on Roma Next Generation. So as you know, we've had results-oriented management and accountability principles and practices since the late 90s. And so for almost 20 years, we've been looking at the basic principles of Roma, but with the new focus on performance measurement and performance management, we're looking at Roma Next Generation. So we have a series of curriculum trainings that are on the partnership website, creating a local theory of change, and understanding community level work, and implementing the full ROMA cycle. And as well as the 2 that we're going to briefly mention here today, setting the stage for data collection and for analysis. There's recorded webinars and PowerPoint slides as well. So there's also a brief presentation on the same topic that's for boards. It's looking at what the board needs to know about analysis of the data, and that's also available at the partnership website. So as we go through the ROMA cycle, and this is hopefully familiar to all of you, we're looking at, we talk about analysis of data, but we're looking at the evaluation for a part of the cycle. So this is where we compare what we've done with what we said we would do. We make some decisions about that, and then we suggest some changes. So in order to do that, we have to really have good data to analyze. So the workshops that we have posted called Setting the Stage for Data Collection really help you think about your data before you start to analyze it. What does data quality look like? Why we need to collect data, thinking about measurement tools, and then just considering data requirements in general as a prelude to the data analysis part. So first of all, just to set us all on the same page so that we have a clear lexicon going forward. What is data? And what you have on the screen is a lot of different ways of talking about data: facts and statistics, figures, things known or assumed, and so on. So those are elements of how we would define data, but it's really about what does that data mean to us? So as we know, I think this is a fact of modern life, that we have so much data coming into our brains at any given time that we have to really think about what to do with that data, how to consider it, how to work with it, because not every piece of data that we have access to will lead to improvements in programming. And if you have too much data, sometimes that's worse than not having enough. So you have to really be careful that you're not being led in a direction that you don't need to go by data that you really don't need. So remember, data is only as valuable as the insights that you can draw from it. So it's important that we understand how to work with this data even before we can analyze it. I've heard this quote more and more lately. It seems like everybody's found it, but we're data rich and information poor. And so, we're hearing, oh, we're collecting all this data, we're putting it into an annual report, we've got so much data, but we don't make meaning out of it. We don't have the information that we need. And so I love this little quote. It's like, like oil is a value, has a value, but it can't be used until it's refined. And so I thought that was a nice analysis that data is the same way. You can't use it until it's turned into information. So this is something that you've probably heard before, but data is the facts that are observed and measured and collected, and information is what you get once you've analyzed the data. But even beyond that, you have to be able to take that information and create knowledge in order to make decisions. So knowledge is derived from the interaction of information and your own experience. So while we say you have to turn data into information before you can use it, I wanted to also say that how you use it really has to do with your own experience with the topic, so that you know what's important and what's not important, so that it actually provides you with the knowledge that you need in order to make decisions. Part of the concept of collecting data is because we need it for reporting. And we've talked to community action agencies across the country, and one of the things that they say is that, well, we have lots of different funding, and we need different data elements for all those different funding sources. So we have different requirements for reporting. And so that's a piece that you really have to consider. This is one of the things that people get stuck on when they're thinking about data. They're like, well, our data is in all different databases or different sources, or we have different elements. How do we put them all together? And that's really going to be the agency's job, to see how does all of this information come together into an overall agency plan for the achievement of outcomes. This helps us to think about the mindset, why we're collecting data. It's not just for reporting, because if it were, we'd be crazed, because we have all those different requirements. So we need to really have the data-centric mindset that we're collecting data to manage and support the agency's programs and services. Make sure you have the right data, and this is important. You have to be able to trust your data. Your data has to be complete and timely and accurate and reliable. And there's a lot of information about each of these elements in the material that you can get from online. But just know that your data quality has to be high in order for you to be able to analyze it and come up with good information. In order to have that good quality data, you have to have policies and procedures that really help you understand the collection of the data, the storage of the data, and how to aggregate the data that's related to these different pieces, clients, services, strategies, and outcomes. This is a little document that is part of the material. You may not be able to see it well on the site, but on the slide. But first, to do an analysis of what's going on in your own agency. Where is the data being collected now? Who does it? What's the process of the collection? Why is it being collected? And then who needs to see that data? Who needs to use that data? So we just have a couple examples here of what the receptionist has to do with data, what a case manager has to do with data. And if you think about each person in your agency and what they have to do with the data elements and the processes, that will help you understand how you get the data, and it will help you move into creating policies and procedures for analysis of data. And so in order to get that data, you have to have good measurement tools. There's a lot of good information about measurement tools, and the National Data Task Force is working on a list of measurement tools, but these are the things that prove that you have actually provided services and have helped people to achieve outcomes. And once you have your tools, this will help you determine how you collect your data, how and where you store your data, and how often the data is collected and reported. Those tools can be about outputs or outcomes, they can be about progress, or they can be about the end result. They can be qualitative or quantitative, and they can be a tool, or they can be you might consider where the information from the measurement tools are stored. We sometimes think of a database as a measurement tool, but that's really a storage system. So what do you look at before you know that you have to enter something into your database? And that's the measurement tool. So you need to be considering where the data comes from in terms of the measurement tools. And it isn't either or, but it's really all of the above. You have to think about all of the kinds of measurement tools that you have in your system. And I'm going to turn the program over now to Carrie Gibson, who is going to talk about the next part of the system, analysis and use of data.
Great. Thank you so much, Barbara. And thanks, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. So Barbara did a really nice job of setting us up, setting the stage for thinking about collecting the data. And so just briefly, I want to talk with y'all just a bit about, now that we have the data, how can we start that process of analyzing it, and as Barbara said, turning that data into information and then applying our own experience to it in terms of our knowledge, using the knowledge that we have. So just as the slides that Barbara shared with us, those are from an existing training series. So the information I'm going to be sharing, this is just a bird's eye view, if you will, of a great deal of information that's available to you in the Introduction to Analysis and Use of Data training series. So just know that there is much more information out there through the partnership website available to you. So as we start to think about moving forward into analyzing our data, we need to make sure that we're mindful of the role that the board of directors plays in this process. And so certainly we know that board members, they may not all be engaged in the actual data collection or measurement. They may not be involved in the actual analysis process, but we do know from our organizational standards that they do have very specifically defined roles in terms of what they are supposed to be doing in terms of this part of the ROMA cycle. So if you recall, Standard 9.5 actually says that the board gets a report that includes both the outcomes the agency achieved and also the context in which those outcomes occurred. So we're wanting to make sure that both the operational and the strategic program performance are included in these reports. But here's the important piece. The board doesn't just get the report, they also need to get an analysis of the report so that they have some meaning. They're able to understand the context of the numbers and the information that you are giving to them. The program staff, the administrative staff of your agency, y'all are the ones that know these programs best. And so you can help the board to understand, what does this report data say? And then through those discussions, that's where you can start to identify, are there any suggestions for change that need to be made? So consider this as an example. We wouldn't want to just give a statement to the board in isolation. So we wouldn't just want to say, for example, 300 individuals got a job. The analysis around that comes from things like, what happened? What was going on in the community that helped them to get those jobs? Who are those people that were able to get those jobs? All of those questions, that's really part of the analysis. And so then that allows us to start looking at, are there any ideas or suggestions on what may need to happen so that outcomes can be increased, so that service delivery can be improved. So remember, it's not necessary for the board to be involved in the actual analysis, but they do need to make sure and understand that there's a process in place that so that they can be confident that that analysis is happening. And then they're responsible for considering any suggestions in terms of improving the process, and then ultimately making decisions about whether or not to approve any of those changes that may need to be made. So in terms of analysis, sometimes we can get a little intimidated by that word, but analysis is really just how we learn. It's how we understand things. Analysis of data helps us to identify the decisions that we need to make. Analysis provides information that we need in order to make those decisions. So think about this. When you're analyzing your data, when you're looking at the did it happen, did it not happen, why or why not, oftentimes that's going to lead us to discover that at least some of what we thought just isn't so. So we're going to start to challenge our assumptions. Some of those assumptions might be reinforced. Some of them we may find that that they're not necessarily true. So that means that we may have to ultimately change our approach or be open to doing things differently. So some questions that you might want to answer that you're considering, because that's really what analysis is we're just asking questions so we can turn that data into information. So you see on your screen, did we do what we thought we would do? Did we serve who we thought we would serve? Did we make an impact? Did we see something change? Can we tell what we did produced the best opportunity for results? Do we need additional resources? So these types of questions, this is how we make sense of all of this data that we collect throughout the year. So it's important as we're thinking about this to keep in mind who might have insight into these questions. So if we can't answer these questions, who in our agency or who else out there can? And it's important to find ways that we can discuss data and have all people at the table who have those insights. And so how might the data and the people with those insights be brought together? What do we need to do to make that happen? So thinking about who's going to be involved in that process, and also thinking about when. How often is that going to happen? We don't want to just see analysis at the end of the year and say, okay, we've submitted the report, now let's look at it, ask some of these questions and move on. So you might want to look at the intensity and the frequency of when that analysis actually happens as well. So some basic techniques. Again, analysis is really just having that curious mindset, that being the wondering mindset of, ooh, I wonder what I'm going to find out. So how can we do that? What are some techniques that we can use? So the first technique on the next slide talks about aggregating the data. So aggregation really just means to bring things together. So to combine data to really understand the big picture. So in the case of agency data, you may bring together all the different data related to one program, like demographics, service units, the outcomes that happened, or you can look at data related to the participants. So how old were they? Where did they live? The family type. All of those different things, those might be also from agency programs. So aggregation is really just bringing together these facts and the observation, so the experience and the story, so that you can see the whole picture. Lisbeth Shore actually says, no data without stories and no stories without data. So one way agencies often decide to look at or organize their data is to think about putting it perhaps in different buckets, if you will. And so some of those buckets could be the list of domains that we see in the CSBG annual report. So things like education, employment, housing. We often hear that agencies want to look at well-being indicators. So defining what this means. What do you mean by a well-being indicator? That would be the first step to determine what data elements would fall into that group. So it's really thinking about how are your own agency needs going to be met? How do you want to organize those buckets so that you can start to make sense of and pull those different data elements together. So this next one, count, you may think, gosh, well, that seems pretty simple. 1, 2, 3, 4, how many were served? Seems like a simple question, but we know that it's actually very difficult for some agencies to get a true count. So think about all of the discussions and the issues that we've had related to getting an unduplicated count. So being able not only to count the number of services that we provide, but being able to look and see how many people did we actually provide those services to. So if we can't get a good count of people served, it makes it really difficult to count how many of them were of a certain characteristic, how many of them were successful, which then leads to trouble with that aggregation that we talked about on the previous slide. So another technique is to compare. And so that's just really looking at different sets of information and seeing how they're different or how they're similar. So we can look at program data for year to year. Was the quantity of service the same? Did the service that we provide last year and we did this year, did it lead to the same outcome? Were the costs the same? Did it cost more? Did it cost less? What do we see in terms of national trends? So if we look and see, well, here's what we did in our neck of the woods, what does that look like compared to other folks across your state or across the country? A huge comparison that we encourage and talk about using a results-oriented framework is comparing what we targeted to happen to what actually happened. There's so much information that we can take from looking at those two data points. We can also compare, did the outcomes that we achieve align with the needs that we identified in the needs assessment? Do we see that one group was more successful than another? Do we see that our performance was similar to that of other providers? So again, just lots of different things. The sky is really the limit when we think about the multiple points that we can compare. Another technique is looking at trends. So really attempting now to spot that pattern, to spot that trend. And our next two presenters are going to speak to this as well. So we're looking at areas where we're performing well because we want to be able to duplicate that success. We can also look at areas where we're underperforming so that way we can really hone in and say, okay, is this essential to our mission? Do we need to strengthen this program or do we need to abandon it? So we need to look at the trends to help us make that decision. And we can also uncover unexpected relationships. So we can really have some insights in seeing, oh gosh, it wasn't just this year, but the past 4 years we've experienced this. Or, oh my goodness, why this dip up or increase up and dip down? You know, what's happening? What does this mean? So again, coming back to this idea of targeting. So how close did we come to our projections? Understanding what happened in previous years can help us to set better targets for the upcoming years. So when we submit our targets, when we're completing those targets at the beginning of the year, it's not just, you know, oh, well, I like whole numbers or, you know, I like the number 13. You know, we want to have some context again for why. So you could plot the trend. You could say, okay, this seems to be, you know, on average how we're going. You know, look at those community conditions, what's happening. So there's lots of information available to you both online from the partnership and also from NASCAP. Because again, we really want to, in our analysis, we want to look at the relationship to how well we said we would do to how well that we actually did. And within that comparison, that's when we can start to make decisions about what we might need to strengthen or abandon. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to David Weiss from CASE in West Virginia, and he's going to give us an overview of how his agency used data to drive decision making.
Thank you very much. So I'm David Weiss. I am from Community Action of Southeastern West Virginia. We are one of 16 community action agencies in West Virginia. Our primary counties border with Virginia, and that's the southern part, not the northern part. We do have a variety of programs spanning from prenatal services to senior services, but our concentration has always been on housing. And currently we are very active in combating the opioid epidemic in our area. So where does all this begin? Those of you who have done ROMA training, this should look very familiar to you. It begins with the ROMA Cycle. And currently we were doing our community needs assessment. So we were in the assessment stage of the ROMA Cycle. And that's where we begin, but that doesn't mean that we have to go step by step, because as you'll see through this, I do bounce around quite a bit within the ROMA Cycle. And yeah, I want to give my inspiration as to what led me to do this. It's curiosity, and right now my inspiration is actually laying on top of the refrigerator asleep. But much like him, we noticed something in our community needs assessment, and we just wanted to take a closer look at it. So we went over there like a curious cat, and we just started digging in to see where it would lead us to. So what we were looking at is, does something seem out of the ordinary? And if it is, what does it mean? Is it a threat to what we're doing, or is it an opportunity for us to do something better? And what can we do to address that threat, or what can we do to take advantage of the opportunity? So this is what caught our attention. During our community needs assessment, our 3 primary counties showed a steady decrease in population, except for one, which was Summers County. And it showed almost a 5.5% increase in population. Now, I'll make no qualms about it. We are from a small rural area, and the county we are talking about has a population of about 13,000 people. But that went up to about 13,700, thereabouts. So we started looking closer, and we found out that 1/4 of the population of Summers County is over the age of 64. Now, unfortunately, on this slide, my highlight kind of shifted to the right, but the last 2 columns on that chart shows that the males and females over 64 within Summers County. Next slide, please. So then we started digging deeper into the population. The next largest population in Summers County were adults aged 55 to 64. So those who were not 65 and older, the next largest group was right before there. So Summers County has a large population of people aged 55 and up. Next slide, please. So we had to take a look at these questions. So what does the increase in the older population mean to the community? And how does it relate to the poverty rates and also the income levels within this county? So we took a look at first the poverty rates, and again, no qualms. The almost 26% of the people in Summers County were living in poverty. So this is just something that we had to take into account before we started making any plans. The change in poverty was increasing. You can see from the year 2000 up to 2014, we had a 3.5% increase in the poverty rate. So not only did we have a high population in poverty, unfortunately, it was showing a trend to increase as well. So we started looking at seniors in poverty, and 12.5% of the seniors of people age 65 and up living in Summers County were in poverty. So again, this is creating some very interesting issues for us to address. And the median income of our 3 primary counties of operation, Summers County did have the lowest median income of the 3. So we have an older population that is in poverty and has the lowest median income within our service area. And these are just the facts we had moving forward. So as I did mention earlier, our agency has a focus on housing. So this is where our attention initially went to. So we started looking at some of the housing information available to us. One interesting thing about West Virginia is we have a very high home ownership rate. In 2000 at Summers County, that was at 79.1%. The reason for this is a lot of the homes are being passed down generation after generation. So while the individual may own the home oftentimes is in need of a lot of repair. But by 2014, that 79% of homeowners had dropped to 57%. So we show a very marked decrease in homeowners. So then we looked at residential property vacancy. This is just residential properties that someone could be living in, but it was, for whatever reason, empty. And in 2014, that was at 7.2%, which again was the highest in our counties of attention there. So the 2014 data told us that we have an increasing population in one of our counties. That population is primarily 55 years and older. There's a high rate of poverty, and unfortunately, it was showing a trend for that rate to increase. There's a decrease in owner-occupied homes and an increase in vacant residential properties, and this county did have the lowest median household income of our counties of focus. So after looking at the data from our community needs assessment, we decided that we also needed to hear what the people had to say. Yeah, that's the quantitative data versus the qualitative data. And the best way to get qualitative data that we found is to go out and talk to people, see what they want, see what they value. So in speaking with them, we found out that the pros of living in the area is there's a cheaper living cost for those on a fixed income. And many of them were closer to their family. And the area of Summers County does have a small town feel. But some of the cons about living there is there's limited opportunity for younger residents. And it is hard to travel to and from. I know that transportation is always a major issue, but even more so in our rural areas here in West Virginia. So we took stock of what resources we had in Summers County. We had a local CSBG office. We were operating a Head Start. And but one thing we did have, and we still do and have strengthened, is our partnerships. We had partnerships with the Family Resource Network there, the Area Agency on Aging, and several other faith-based and other entities that we collaborated with. So our real strength was in our partnerships in the area. So again, we did have limited service in the area. With only one CSBG office and a Head Start, our focus was on a different population altogether. We were looking at children aged 3 to 5 for our Head Start program, and that's where most of our concentration went. So we decided to take a look at what we could accomplish. So we set some goals. We wanted to assure that seniors with low income would have adequate and affordable housing, and seniors were able to remain independent. Our plans include to create outreach to identify seniors of low income who needed housing services and find out specifically what they needed to secure and maintain housing. And also we needed to establish linkages with other services beyond the housing that we were already providing that they needed to enable them to remain independent. And in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see the ROMA Cycle again, and we have moved on to the planning stage. So this is what our plan looked like moving forward. So again, I'll draw your attention to the ROMA Cycle. This is what we actually did. This is the implementation stage. We increased our partnerships. We coordinated with the local agency on aging, offering support and resources to assist the increase in senior population. And we also increased our outreach. We had our family service advocates with Head Start to speak with any family they came in contact with to try to locate and identify seniors that may need assistance, to make sure that they were aware that there were people out there that could help them. And of course, we had increased communication between the local council on aging and our commission on aging, so that we could share ideas, resources, and knowledge, and that's still ongoing today. So we had to take a look at what level of work this is. And well, like most agencies, like most, all of us do, we began to address it at the family level. But we found that there were also community level issues to address. And also we had to make sure that our agency had the capacity to be able to do this work and to make sure that it was sustainable after the initial push. So again, the process didn't end there. That is what we did. That was our plan. And so now we have to circle back in the ROMA cycle and take a look at the assessment again and see what's happened, see what has worked and what hasn't worked. So from 2014, we show a large increase in population, and now into 2017, that population is beginning to decrease. While it is still higher than the original assessment in 2000, the trend of increase is beginning to go away. So we take a look at population change by age. Now this is a little subtle on this graph, but basically every population until you get to age 65 plus is decreasing in Summers County. But age 65 and plus is increasing. So everyone else is leaving except for seniors. Now this one we are very proud of, that the poverty rate is actually decreased. But we want to look at this from 2014 and 2017. Nearly half of the people in poverty are seniors. But again, it is kind of subtle in the slide, but the overall poverty has decreased and the number of seniors in poverty has also decreased. So we are absolutely thrilled about this. So we start looking at some of the trends now. The home ownership rate. In 2014, that was 57.18%, and now that is at 52.66%. Now again, this has decreased, so there are fewer owner-occupied homes, but it was not the huge decrease that we showed between 2000 and 2014. So again, another way to simply show this is just a line graph. It can often be easier to understand than just looking at the raw numbers. So again, the line graph shows a marked decrease and then a more gradual decrease moving into 2017. Now we look at our vacant property rates. In 2014, that was up near 7%, but in 2017, it's only about 4.5%. So that means there are fewer properties that are vacant. And what we discovered that was happening was the seniors, instead of buying property, are now renting property. So those properties that were unoccupied are now occupied with renters instead of being purchased. So what are the next steps? Is the focus on seniors still needed? Well, we feel that it is, because that is the population that is increasing. Is housing still a primary issue? Unfortunately, it is. A lot of the homes still need a lot of work done to them. So we have to try to find ways to make sure that the housing that our seniors are in is safe and affordable. Have our programs worked? Well, I feel that they have, especially our partnerships. This is just the ideal situation for the partnerships to really shine, and it shows that we can't do all of this alone. And what can be done differently going forward, I believe, is to bring more people in. The more people who are aware of what's going on, the more people that can assist in facing the problem. And so these are just some of the findings that we put together. Primarily, we did not do this alone. This was any and all achievements was made by the community partners and those that live in the community. And the work is far from over. We have to be diligent in looking at the data and making sure that that nothing happens that we're not aware of. So we always have to be vigilant in that to make sure that there's not something happening and us just be unaware of it. So and if we do all that, consistently review our data, consistently talk with our community partners and work with them, then we'll be able to make our community stronger and a better place to live.
Okay. Well, thanks, David. And we're going to move to our next story now. I don't see any questions in the chat box right now. So we're going to turn it over to Kate to talk about the program in North Carolina. Take it away.
Well, thanks so much. Can you all hear me, I hope? I'm hoping. So
yes, you're good. We can hear you. Good.
Okay, great. Thanks. So next slide, please. I am Kate Singogo, and I work for Community Action Opportunities. We're located in North Carolina in the western part of the state. We have an 8-county service area. A lot of the work that we do is kind of rural, and kind of the biggest city that we serve is Asheville, North Carolina. We have Head Start, WAP, Weatherization, and LifeWorks, which is our self-sufficiency program. And I am the self-sufficiency program manager, so the majority of the information that I'm going to be talking about today is related to our LifeWorks program. And I wanted to put in a quick note here just to say that our agency has changed over the years, that we have had different programs. We had a name change at one point. And so as we think about the role of data in making decisions, I think it's really important to look at how trends can affect what is needed, what programming we have can be looked at, just to be aware of the changes that could come with your agency. So just really briefly, a big piece for me in this work is just knowing that you really can't analyze what doesn't exist, that you kind of data collection 101, you got to make sure that you're asking the right questions. That can be much more difficult than it sounds, and sometimes you might ask questions that you think are going to give you information and you get a whole different set of answers. And so just I'll give you an example when we get to the next slide, but just to say that you really got to make sure that the questions that you're asking make sense and that they give you the data and the information that you're looking for. Sometimes you might have to start from scratch. Sometimes you might need to take what you already have and edit what you're doing, and that it does really require continual review. That piece of just doing kind of data collection and reporting when a report is due, that will not get you to this place of being able to get the information and the knowledge that we want to get so that we can better inform our programming. And then again, knowing where and how to store the data. Maybe you have a database that works really well and you can run beautiful reports from that. If not, how are you going to collect this data and store it on a spreadsheet, on a Google form? What's going to work for you and for your program and your agency? And using the CSBG annual report, it really is useful. There's a lot of information that you can glean from this. And so it's just really important to know that you've done all this work and you have all this data here at your fingertips, and you can really pull a lot out from that. So this was my example of asking the right questions. It's also an example of looking at how you're collecting data. So on the left, where it says fiscal year 2018-19, you have an Excel spreadsheet. We were using this. We created this. This was a customer satisfaction survey. And our team came up with this because we really authentically wanted to know how we were doing. Our program is a long-term self-sufficiency program, so people can be in our program up to 3 years, sometimes up to 5. And so we wanted to kind of capture what was happening along the way and seeing if the work that we're doing with people long-term made a difference. So we developed these 6 surveys, and then we had an agency level survey that they completed when they came in kind of through the door with their enrollment, and then we had an exit survey that they did at the end after they were, after they had left the program. And we spent a ton of time really poring over this and coming up with these questions and trying to figure out how can we really capture if we're doing a good job, if we're helping people move out of poverty, if we're doing what we set out to do. We really want to know. And what we found out is that people just weren't filling out these surveys, that they ask for a lot of written work. We ask for people to provide examples, and we ask for people to list all of their concerns, and people just weren't filling them out. And I think it was confusing for our coaches who were having a hard time keeping track of what survey different customers were on, and it just didn't work. And the other thing is that we were doing all of these surveys, and then the coaches would just put them in my box, and I would enter them manually into an Excel spreadsheet. And it was time consuming, and what you can't see here is that there were some graphs that would come out of this. So I was able to compile this data in a more meaningful way, but it still was clunky and people weren't filling it out. It just wasn't effective. So we created a new survey, and this time we got input from our customers and said, how many questions would you actually take the time to fill out? We came up with a new questionnaire, and this time we put it in Google Forms so that we can text it to them or we can email it to them. We can still give them a paper copy if they need that. And this way it also is more anonymous. And so there were just lots of benefits to changing what we were doing. So just to say, sometimes you put a lot of work and effort and you think you're being intentional and asking the right questions, and then you come to find out you're wrong. So just that's a great lesson, and it just means that it's time to change what you're doing and do something different. So we really want to be curious. And David mentioned this, and Carrie mentioned, you've heard this already about being curious, and it's just such an important piece of this work is that you really go in with an open mind and think about, what am I going to be able to find from this? And that you are creative, that you're looking at different ways of doing things, that you are open to new ideas. If you come in with a closed mind, or you're just trying to get this number, or you're trying to find a number to make this thing work, you're really missing the heart of what of the work that we do first and foremost, and also just what is possible with the use of data. You want to have the right people involved. This could be across the program, people across the agency from different programs, including frontline staff. And motivation is really key. We really have to know why we analyze data. And for our team, we are in the business of helping people get out of poverty, and we're working with people day in and day out who come to us in crisis, who are really struggling. And we take that seriously, and it's important to us that we do a really good job and that we are great stewards of our funds and of this work, and that we're doing the best that we can. And so we want to look at what we're doing, analyze it, make sure that the programs that we have in place are working, that we're serving people the best way that we can. And just to say that it's important that the people that you have working on this, that they have some interest in it. People can be voluntold to do stuff all day long, and they might do it begrudgingly. You're not going to get the depth and the insights and the quality of work that you would get if you were working with a team of people who were really interested in it. And so again, when you're thinking about the curious piece, sometimes you can go in where you're searching for trends, and that can be okay if you're trying to figure out, is this true? I have this idea, checking your assumptions and really looking at, I want to see if I'm right about this. That's a really great use of data analysis. And then there are times when it's good to go in blind and just see what it is that you're able to find. So the other piece is just that you can really use data to create your local theory of change and to really look at, what your agency is doing, what you need, what's happening in your communities. And that's a huge benefit that we have to be able to do that work. Okay. Now the fun begins. So on this slide, if you look, and sorry, I didn't highlight this for you all, but if you look at number 9, it has household type. And then on A, it says single person is 23. And then if you look down at number 10, this has household size, and it says A, single person is 24. And so those numbers are different. It changed from 9 to 10. And so, and sorry to back up, if you don't recognize this, this is our CSBG annual report. And so this was completed this is from our last fiscal year. And when I filled this out, I saw this difference between the single person on number 9 and the single person on number 10. And I thought, what is going on here? How is this different? And so I went to my coaches and I had to really get the story. And you heard Carrie say earlier that piece about, stories are so important when it comes to data. And this is a great example of that, where I originally didn't know why those numbers were different until I found out from one of my coaches that what we actually had was, if you look back up at number 9, under C with single parent female, there were 39 households. We had one mom in our program who did not have her child with her at the time. So she identified as a C, single parent female, but she only had one person in her household at that time. So she fell under a number 10. She fell under 10A. So just to say that really looking at your data and trying to assess, where is this coming from? Where are there discrepancies? How can we explain this? Having those stories can be really powerful. The other thing that we saw when we started to analyze this data was, again, looking at number 9, the household type, that we only had one single parent male that we served for the fiscal year. And we knew that this was not at all representative of the population that we serve. And so this was kind of a red flag for us. Why are we serving 39 single moms and only one single dad? What are we doing to not meet the needs of our community? And so we had to do some digging there and really assess our program and look at what we were doing well in some areas and what we needed to improve upon in others. When it was time for us to hire a coach, I was very intentional about wanting to hire a male onto our team because we were an all-female staff. And I thought it was important for us to have a male coach available, and if that might make a difference in being able to reach a different population. Sure enough, it absolutely has been. So, we hired our new coach in January, and since that time, that number has jumped up to 12 single parent males that we have served. Just in we're getting at about, 9 months here. No, that my math is wrong on that. Closer to a year, but just to say that we have had movement. But it took us really looking at this data and analyzing it for us to come to that conclusion. The other piece about this is that we are able in our database to get a point in time snapshot. And so to see who, if you're looking over on the right-hand column and you're looking at income sources and how many people are receiving, TANF, or how many people have income from employment only. We can do a point-in-time report to track that and see how it changes over time, to see how those customers who were captured in this report are now doing 6 months later. So just to say, again, this is the CSBG annual report. While this is not the only way that we capture data and not the only tool that we use to analyze data, it is a really great place to start. So just a couple of, examples of ways that we have used this so far. Oh, the things you can analyze. And we've talked about this a little bit already, and so I won't go over all of these, but just to say that no matter what program you work in, you can analyze so many different pieces of information and really gain that knowledge and use that to inform your programs. You can look at attendance or pre and post scores, kind of looking at like that point in time report on the previous slide, where you're able to track like where were people at this point, and then 6 months later had that shifted. Similarly, if you were running a Head Start program, looking at entrance scores versus exit scores for reading, or maybe not fully reading, but whatever your measures are to capture success in your different programs. Looking at trends from year to year or trends across your programs or classes. Maybe you have a class that was doing really well at one point and now it's not doing well. What shifted? Looking at, was it the instructor? Did we get a new instructor and the previous one was more engaging and so people really liked coming to the class? Maybe it was that the community need has been met and there's no longer a need for that class. So really understanding the why, getting the story behind where that data is coming from. So the list really is kind of never ending here, and that piece about being creative and curious and really looking at all of the pieces that you can analyze to get information about how your programs are working or areas where you can improve. So you've done some data collection and then you've done some data analysis and you've figured out that there are some trends, that maybe something needs some attention. Now what? Now it's time to make some changes. Our program does use data to support the changes that we make. So our year-end report, I pulled some of this information just from our database, and what you're seeing there, it says caseload. That's a little misleading. What those numbers really mean next to each coach's name, that means the number of people who they worked with to attempt to enroll them, not everyone who Becca worked with. Not all 46 people came into our program. But that's how many people she worked with over the course of the fiscal year to determine if they were eligible to attempt to get them into the program. And basically what this just says, what this said to me when I looked at this, was that Buncombe County is serving much higher numbers than our full-time coach in McDowell County. That makes a lot of sense. The population in Buncombe County is much higher than the population in McDowell. And at the same time, this really showed me that Buncombe County needed some extra support, that our coaches were spending a lot of time working with people who ended up not coming into the program just due to a variety of factors, but then how is that affecting the work that they're doing with their customers who are enrolled? The other piece that I was able to look at was the number of applications, which you can see it says that we were up 148 this past fiscal year from 109 the fiscal year previous. So just to say that, again, we're seeing a trend, and I knew a lot of where this was coming from. Justin, the male hire that we had hired in January, works part-time. He's stationed a couple of days up at our Justice Resource Center, working with people who are justice involved. And we have a lot of applications coming in from the work that he is doing there. So we're tapping into a whole new population and here in Buncombe County. And what that said to me was, we need some support. So I actually wrote a grant, got approved for funding, and now I'm in the process of hiring for a new position for some kind of intake outreach program assistant work for our program. And it was data that got me to that point. I was able to look at the numbers, to look at the trends, to see what was happening last year, what's happening this year. Oh, we have a big increase. We're going to need some help. And then using that data to really support the grant application and say, this is why it is needed. So the turkey story, it's the idea there. I don't know where this came from, but the turkey story is that there's a little girl who goes to her mom at Thanksgiving and says, hey, Mom, why do we always cut the legs off of our turkey? When I see pictures of turkeys in magazines or on TV, the turkeys always have their legs on. Why do we do that? And the mom says, actually, honey, I don't know. It's what your grandma always did. Why don't you go ask your grandma? So the little girl goes to her grandma and says, hey, Grandma, why do we cut the legs off the turkey? Grandma says, you know what? I don't know. It's what my mom always did. Why don't you go ask your great-grandma? So the little girl goes to her great-grandma and says, hey, why do we cut the legs off the turkey for Thanksgiving? And the great-grandma says, because when I was growing up, the oven that we had was too small, and so we couldn't fit a whole turkey in. And so I love this story, and I think about it all of the time when I'm thinking about Roma and I'm thinking about just the whole cycle in general, and the idea that Roma really tells us that we need to not just do things because that's the way that they've always been done. This is backed up by Peter Drucker, who has a strong influence and presence in Roma, and also Oprah will tell you that Maya Angelou is the one that taught her, when you know better, you do better. And so that kind of philosophy is, it really sticks with me, that if I know that something isn't working, if I see a trend, I have to question that. And it can be really easy to just keep up with the status quo and just keep going the way that things are going and doing things because that's how they've always been done. But we really do want to question. We really do want to search for information and see if there is a better way, see if there is something else out there that could be more effective. Really analyzing the work that you're doing. So a lot of it is trial and error, and that's a beautiful thing. Being able to kind of try something out, seeing how it works, knowing why it didn't work. That is really important to understand, what went wrong and why. And really learning what did work, if it was successful. So, it can be easy for us to, again, assume that we know why something was successful. Data can really help us suss that out to determine if it is successful or not, and why, and if the reasons that we have, those assumptions that we have, if they're true or not. And just, again, if you're researching and looking at making programmatic shifts, you can always look at what is happening elsewhere. We are part of a wonderful network of community action agencies who are doing really innovative, incredible work in their communities. And so, we all have our differences. Our work does need to be rooted in our community needs assessment. And at the same time, it's a great thing to be able to partner and to just kind of ask around and see if there are ideas out there for how you could do something differently. So yes, we want to put these decisions into action, and we really want to innovate. Like I said before, our team really takes our jobs seriously. I feel very fortunate to be part of a team that is very passionate about the work that we do, and that we just feel strongly about being able to help people move out of poverty. So we want to bring our best and brightest ideas to the table each day. So our agency, our LifeWorks program, historically has served 3 counties. And starting in July, we received a designation for another 3 counties in western North Carolina for our LifeWorks program. And when we looked at the information about those 3 counties, we saw that there was another community action agency that had been serving those those counties rather, and they had given up their designation voluntarily. They were just kind of moving their agency in a different direction, and their CSBG designation, excuse me, and just to clarify. And so we looked at their data and the work that they had been doing, and one thing that we really noticed from their community needs assessment was that there is a large need for families who lack college degrees to obtain high-paying careers, and that there's a boom in manufacturing in this county. And so we really kind of put our thinking caps on and did some research and came up with the idea of holding these classes, which we are calling RAISE, recognizing and increasing skills to employment. And we want to try this out and see if it works. So the idea is that we are going to have these classes, which are going to be a combination of soft skills, job readiness prep, and financial capabilities to help people get into non-traditional jobs. So traditional jobs in this county in particular is really defined by hospitality and healthcare. There's a large tourism population here, and so the hospitality industry is a very popular industry, but it's not a high-paying industry. And this manufacturing, the opportunity that we have here is to really get people who don't have degrees into some really wonderful jobs. So we're going to have 3 cohorts this fiscal year. Our goal is to serve 10 people per cohort. We're partnering with local nonprofits and community colleges to find people who could be a good fit for these classes, and we're going to see how it goes. This is a new thing for us. I think it's an ambitious goal. The data that we have supports the idea that we can serve this many people through the classes. But to say that this is kind of an example of innovation, we're not sure how it's going to work out, but we're going to give it a go, and then we'll reassess after our first year and see what we need to change. Next slide. Thanks. And then similarly, we are another one of the new county designations that we received is Polk County, which is a very rural, smaller county down kind of at the southern border of North Carolina, western North Carolina. Has a population of just about 20,000 people, and the allocation that we received for this county was $32,375. And we wanted to serve more people. This county has historically not been able to serve a large population at all, and we want people to know who we are. We want to be able to help people kind of across the county and not just in one city center. And so we came up with a new idea. It's called the Polk Emergency Assistance Connection. And to say that this feels pretty scary for us in a lot of ways. It is a variation from our very well-established and successful model, which is very low numbers for our caseloads and very deep, intensive, long-term work. So we are moving away from that for Polk County in an attempt to serve more people with the hopes that if we can kind of get more people in the door, have more people find out who we are, that eventually we could potentially shift our model in Polk County to encompass a more long-term self-sufficiency program. So we're just doing some light case management, some budgeting, some resume work. We're going to have scheduled appointments and the availability for people to walk in, which is not something that we've done in the past. And of course, we'll be available for follow-up. And we are hoping to serve 45 people in this county, where in the past it's served closer to like 4 or 5 per year. So this is our pilot year. We're going to, assess as we go. We don't want to wait until the very end of the year to do our assessments for both of these new programs. We kind of want to, see what we're doing as we work along every couple of months, really take a look at our numbers, what's going well, what needs to change, so that we can be responsive to the needs of the community. So what works in tracking innovation? We got to plan what will be observed, documented, reported, and analyzed. And we have to have that at the start of implementation. And we want to know before we make the change what we expect to see and how we're going to document it, so that we know what actually happens after. If we don't start off with a baseline, it's really tough for us to know, was it our program that was effective or that made the change? An analysis of our data is going to help us determine our outcomes achieved from this approach versus outcomes achieved before the change was implemented. And findings. So just to say that this innovation, this data analysis, it is supported at the national level. ROMA, it's best practice. So I have an hour that I put on my calendar every week to sit down and pull reports. And to look at the data that I have available. And I would encourage folks to do so as well. This is time well spent. It can be really easy to just kind of focus on the day-to-day work that's in front of you, and we're putting out fires, and that work has to happen. And at the same time, it's really valuable to be able to take a step back and kind of look at the balcony view of what's going on in your programs. So taking that time, having other staff to help do this work, creating a data committee, even if you wanted, those pieces are supported. So it's great for us to do that work. We want to collect data and analyze on an ongoing basis. And I just can't emphasize enough how important that is, to look at things continually. Those point-in-time comparisons are very helpful, and you can really glean a lot of information from there. Again, using the CSBG annual report is great. You can really make them useful for your purposes. And data, while I'm talking about self-sufficiency, data analysis is viable for all of your programs. So these kind of strategies and this work is applicable to everything that we're doing across our agencies. And we always want to question our assumptions. We want to be innovative, we want to try new things, and we want to use resources to make informed decisions. Okay, and that wraps it up for me.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you very much. We have one question that's come in that I wanted to address just real briefly. It's about advocating for programmatic change in different size agencies. And the requester says, I feel that smaller agencies can be an advantage when it comes to being dynamic and responsive to a changing community. And I think that that's one of the discussion areas about agency capacity. Smaller agencies might have more flexibility in response, but they have less resources overall. And so some folks feel that larger agencies, because they have more varied funding sources and larger staffs and more agency capacity in general, that they can be more responsive. So I think the question really is about some of the lessons learned from our two local agency presenters of how you look at the issue, how you dig deep into the issue, how you talk to other people, how you question what the needs actually are, to create a case for change. That case for change is going to be useful regardless of the size of the agency that you're in. That's not a good overall final answer, but that's my brief answer for today. We're always available for additional dialogue, and we can follow up on how to be more, how to set up advocacy for changes once you find data that promotes that change. So I'm going to turn it. That was the only question that I saw. I'm going to turn it over to Carrie to bring us home.
Great. Thank you so much, Barbara. Perfect. So just really in terms of wrapping up, so thinking about you've collected your data and now using your analysis, the knowledge that you glean, and really taking action. So just remembering that data has to be turned into information to support decision making every day in every decision at the operational level. Any of your decisions, in that moment, and then long-term strategic decisions really need to be based on the analysis of facts so that you can source back to reliable and accessible data. And we heard that from our two previous presenters about using the data that they had collected and analyzed to be able to advocate for different changes and resources to tie back to meeting the needs of the community. So it's that application of the analysis to the agency's actions that ultimately lead to that improved service delivery. It leads to better management of programs, and ultimately the big so what is that we're looking to produce better results for families and for our communities too. So once you've made meaning out of your data, then you need to determine what are the appropriate actions that you're going to take. So just using those who, what, when, how questions. So what do we need to do in order to have these improved data analysis practices? So who's currently involved? Who needs to be involved? Who has access to the data? Who can share it? Do we have a regular procedure? So all of these questions you can ask. And again, you can start small. Data analysis doesn't mean you have to take all of your data that you have and suddenly start to analyze everything. So just start with the basic question of what do you want to know? Where is it? Going back to some of those data-centric pieces that Barbara shared with us earlier. So just taking the time to think about how are you going to start implementing this process or improving the process if you're already doing it at your agency. And then lastly, again, just thinking about what do we need in place to really promote and to have a true data-centric approach. So how do we collect the data? Where do we store it? Who gets it? What's the process for analyzing it? And then what do we do with it? Once we've done that analysis, how do we then apply that to make good decisions? What do we need to do to then operationalize that? So who's going to be involved? What do they need to do? How will we know that it's working? How are we going to communicate? And then also looking at, are there new skills that are needed? So what's the current capacity of staff now to do this analysis, and where do we need to look at increasing capacity in the future? So in terms of next steps, I think it looks like we've had a couple of questions come in, and I'm going to turn those actually over to Barbara to answer. And then also I will leave you all with these next steps. So just to consider one thing that you've learned today that you want to put into action, and to come up with one thing that you can do to improve understanding of data analysis. So Barbara, I'll go ahead and turn over to you.
Okay, thank you. I see one of the questions is about dashboards and using dashboards and things like scorecards and other analysis tools. And that's really what we're going to be working on next. We're working with the Data Analysis Task Force and with the partnership to create some samples of dashboards and scorecards. So that'll be coming up next. So I don't have them right now, but they'll be coming. And then looking at data quality, capturing data from transients, populations, and fearful populations. I don't know that there are any steps that we could put our fingers on to post, but that's an incredibly good question that we can put on our agenda to try to gather that data. How to approach. It's the same with homeless populations. They're difficult to gather data from. So we're all very new in this analysis arena. So we're not sure what we need to know. So these questions are very helpful to us as we think about what material we need to develop. So gathering data from special populations and scorecards, dashboards are on our agenda for our next time frame. Courtney, are there any other questions that you see coming in?
We did have one other, but it's more about a certain software system. And so I'll go ahead and pose it to the group and just see, if anybody does have any tips for this person, you can contact me and I can connect you all. But there was a question about, is there any possibility that local agencies can gain access to point-in-time data in Ocean to gain demographic information? So helping with some of the reporting for Salesforce and other required reports.
Right. And that is something that you would want to ask your software vendor about, for sure.
Yeah, and the other thing I would say too is that if there is, any of the agencies listening that, they've worked on capturing data for transient populations or fearful populations, I know that's one thing that we talk about with some of our census work is that outreach to some of those hard to count populations who are often transient and sometimes fearful. So, we're doing a little bit of work, but with just general outreach in our Census 2020 work. But if there are agencies that have tips on that, I'd be happy to connect back to the person that asked and make sure that information gets passed on.
Yeah, and we might be able to create some place to post that information so that people can both provide input as to how they've been successful and also ask specific questions about challenges. So we'll work on that next.
Okay, great. And then the final question I saw was just about the slides and whether those are going to be uploaded and shared. We do have a place on our website that we will have the recording as well as a PDF of all of the slides available. So that'll be on communityactionpartnership.com. And then if you go under, actually, I'll just show you because I have the next slide talks about it. If you go under our resource library, go under tools and resources. There's different options of the types of resources we have. And so this particular webinar and slides will be under the webinars category. And generally we get those posted within about 2 business days. If you do have trouble finding it, or if you'd like the slides a little bit earlier, feel free to email me. My email will be on a slide here in a moment, and I'm happy to get those out to you. One other thing I'll share that was referenced a few times during the webinar was ROMA resources. So related to a lot of the information you heard about today, you heard about actually all of these things. You heard about needs assessments, strategic planning, you heard about creating local theories of change, You heard about analysis of data, working with your board. So all of these types of resources and topics, we have a ROMA for Boards training series, like Barbara mentioned. We also have a ROMA Next Generation training series. And we have a resource guide on our website that encompasses all of these. So the link is on the slides whenever you get those. But you can also go to our resource library and go under just the general view all and type in ROMA and it'll come up. So that's where you can access all of these different resources. Looking forward to some of our upcoming Webinar Wednesdays. Of course, today was on data analysis. Next week, we'll be focusing on building credit for your renters. So our Community Economic Development Department will be talking about that. So for those of you with rental or housing programs, that might be helpful for you. And then on October 16th, we'll be circling back to some ROMA implementation and talking about good process management. So it kind of goes into a little bit more detail on managing those processes and procedures within your organization. And lastly, just a little advertisement here for our 2020 Management and Leadership Training Conference. This time we're going to San Juan, Puerto Rico to support the part of our network that is serving low-income people in that area, especially since they're still recovering from the natural disasters that have happened in that area. So that'll be January 8th through the 10th, 2020. We'll be focusing on a variety of topics. A lot of them will relate to kind of a more enhanced community service focus. We'll be talking about community mobilization, disaster relief efforts. We'll be talking about, racial equity and inclusion. So a lot of good topics to come and participate in January in a very nice, warm location. And with that, if you have any questions about this webinar, the resources associated with them, feel free to reach out to the contacts at the partnership under the Organizational Standards Center of Excellence. So myself, Courtney Kohler, my email address is there at the top, and then we also have Darrell Crocker, our Director of TNTA, that is happy to assist as well. So thank you all for your time today. We appreciate all the presenters that came to deliver this information, and we hope you all have a wonderful day.